Dr. Neal Barnard, thank you so much for joining us on the Plan Trainers podcast today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Great to be with you today.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you. And before we get started, we wanted to know what your moment of gratitude is.
Oh, my moment of gratitude. Well, thank you for asking. I have to say, just about every day when I get here to the Physicians Committee offices, I'm grateful to have a team of very capable doctors and scientists and dietitians and others to share the load with. So I think that applies today and every day.
And I think that there are lots of people who are grateful that you did that, that you do that every day and that you do that as well, because it's changing so many people's lives. And what normally we ask people what was their journey into plant-based nutrition, but what was that defining moment, or what was that journey into creating this Physicians Committee?
Well, I had finished my residency and I was working at a hospital in New York. And I came to the realization that in medicine, we're pretty good with treating illness and diagnosing it in many ways, but we really were dropping the ball when it came to preventing anything. And so that meant we didn't do anything about the heart attack until it came in the emergency room door. And we didn't do anything about breast cancer until it showed up on the mammogram. And I thought, okay, well, why not? We know about ways to make disease not happen. Let's plug that in. And diet is a big part of it. And so, I was also concerned about how research was done. I thought I was concerned about experiments being done on animals that were obviously cruel to them and weren't giving the kinds of results that people needed. And so I wanted to tackle these issues by setting up a group, and I had the bad judgment to call it the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is a mouthful that nobody can remember. And it was the idea that it would be a committee of maybe a dozen or something like that, experts who would weigh in on the issues of the day. And of course, I didn't anticipate how much we would grow and evolve. And but it's been a good journey.
It's definitely grown a lot and made such an impact on so many people's lives, whether it's the 21-day plant-based immersion program that you have that is out there, whether it's you talking to schools and governments about the food in their schools. And I just wanted to bring that up for a moment, because as a teacher, I see the food and how it impacts our students so heavily, and all the work and energy that you put into getting schools to offer vegan food or better food or healthier food is so important. And it's taking such a long time for schools to actually implement this all over the world. And in Canada, we've been lucky, it's a little bit better. But in the US, it's definitely a challenge. So I wonder if you could just talk about that for a bit.
Canada has been about 3 steps ahead, I have to say. In the US, we have the usual sluggishness of the human spirit, which is we change kind of slowly. But we're also labored by industry, which is the dairy industry has got its claws in the federal food policies, so that right now it sounds surprising to say, but there are laws that particularly favor giving milk to kids. And where this really becomes an example of what's wrong is, if you talk about, say, lactose intolerance, back in the 1960s, that was thought to be rare. But since that time, we've gotten wiser, and we discovered that it's actually the norm. The majority of Black Americans, Asians, Native Americans, frankly, every group except for whites, are lactose intolerant in later adulthood, and it starts early in life. And so you can be a 16-year-old kid, you're bringing your tray down the lunch line, and the lunch person says, here's your carton of milk, and you say, I can't drink that. If I do, I'm not going to debate class this afternoon. I'm going to be in the bathroom. By U.S. law, the school is not allowed to give that youngster, that student, a beverage that they can drink. They have to get, by law, they offer cow's milk, and that's it, unless the child hands over a note saying that he or she has a disability or a medical condition. And lactose intolerance isn't a medical condition, it's normal. It's not a disability unless you've got the dairy industry forcing this stuff down your esophagus. So anyway, there are a lot of things like that where the food industry just weighs in so heavily on what kids are eating. And the problem is not just over the short term when they're kids, but you just fast forward 2 decades and American kids gain weight. I mean, they're not alone in this, but they're gaining weight, they get diabetes, they get hypertension, they get cardiovascular disease, they get these problems early. And so by the time they're 50, 55, they're on medications, they've got all kinds of health issues. Some of them might have these anyway, but many would not. And it starts with really having the healthiest foods offered to, we do what we can to give them the right values, good education. Why not give them foods that aren't going to kill them? So anyway, it sounds obvious, but that's what we're dealing with.
It's such a simple solution, but we take such a challenging road to get there, and most people don't want to acknowledge the fact that there's such a power in food that we consume, and it's just it's one of the biggest questions and challenges that we face quite often. So it's definitely
subtle. It's understandable. We grew up with things. When I was a kid, I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. Every day of my life, it was roast beef, baked potatoes, and corn. Except for special occasions when it was roast beef, baked potatoes, and peas. But that was life as we knew it. And we didn't think that a heart attack could be due to that beef that was part of our diet every day. We thought it was old age. Dad's 45, he's getting on in years, so he might have a heart attack. Well, we now know that foods are the drivers for much of this.
Absolutely. And we keep coming in contact with people who say, well, of course I'm on blood pressure medication, or of course I'm on cholesterol medication. I'm in my 50s. That's normal. And while it might be the norm, it's not something that has to be, right? So I think that because it's so normal out there, people aren't thinking twice about what can I do to prevent this, or what can I do to reverse this, because all my cousins, all my sisters, all my brothers, all my friends are all on this medication too. So it's just a normal progression. It's part of getting old.
Lung cancer is normal among smokers. Diabetes and hypertension and obesity and heart disease and colorectal cancer is normal among meat eaters. It should not be that way, and that's not the kind of normal we want.
Absolutely. And I think that you address a lot of this in your new book. Wow, another book, Your Body in Balance. And you also concentrate a lot on hormones in this book. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sex hormone related cancers today.
Yeah, I have to say, for me, it has been such a revelation. Up until now, we thought about the big dinosaur issues like obesity or cancer or heart attacks. And when we look at what hormones do in our bodies and the fact that foods are changing them, it adds a layer of complexity or a new layer of power, if I can put it that way. So you can control all kinds of things. And for me, how this started, I was sitting here at this desk and the phone rang, and it was a young woman who said she couldn't get out of bed that day. And a lot of women have cramps, but for maybe 1 in 10, menstrual cramps are just so bad that you're not going to work that day or to school. And that was her situation. And I just made kind of an informed guess that food might help her. And so she was my first kind of experimental subject. I said, let me give you some painkillers so that you can function now. But for the next month, how about an experiment? No animal products in your diet. I'm going to make you vegan, and we're going to keep oils really, really low. And the reason I did that is what you were asking about, is cancer. She didn't have cancer, but we knew from women who were at risk for breast cancer. Researchers had found that if you really pump up the plant-based foods, then you're getting a lot of fiber, plant roughage in the diet, and plant roughage moderates estrogen. It brings down the amount of estrogen in a woman's blood, and that reduces her risk of cancer. And then researchers also found that, contrarily, it's not just pumping up fiber-rich foods, but getting away from fatty foods. So chicken and beef and cheese and fried stuff. If you remove those, estrogen goes down too. So I thought, well, what are cramps? Cramps are too much estrogen changing the uterus every month, and if I can get the estrogen to back off, her cramps will be better. So anyway, it turned out to be true that this diet cured her. So we then tested it in a randomized clinical trial at Georgetown University, and it worked marvelously. And so then in the course of this study, there was a young woman who thought that she was infertile. And she and her husband had tried for years to have a baby, and they finally gave up, I guess 5 years earlier. And she said it wasn't him. He tests out normal. It's me. I don't ovulate. The second month that she went on this healthy, completely plant-based diet, she came into the research center. She said, Dr. Barnard, I've got some bad news and I've got some good news. And I said, well, what? The bad news is I'm leaving your study. And the good news is I am pregnant. And I saw her years later. She then had 3 kids. So the first young woman I'm describing had what I'm going to call dysmenorrhea, menstrual pain. The second one had infertility. But those are diagnoses that you could kind of take your number 2 lead pencil and erase it. Because the truth is that they were both just out of balance with their hormones. And when you get your foods back into balance, you can tackle all these things. And cramps and infertility don't kill you. But the very same chemical changes that come from being out of balance will lead to breast cancer. In men, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer. These are things that can kill you. And so we get in balance today, and hopefully we will survive tomorrow.
So is it safe to say that women who are experiencing cycles that aren't coming on a regular basis, or women that have estrogen problems, or women that their hormones are off in general in many different ways, are at a higher risk for specific cancers later on?
There are all kinds of issues that can cluster together. And I don't want to frighten women and suggest that menstrual cramps today equal breast cancer tomorrow. Everybody's different. We all have different risks. However, the dietary prescription is about the same. If you're not in balance, what that means is that your hormones are either too low or too high, not where they need to be. And hormones they sound mysterious. They're really just sort of letters that go in the mail. The ovaries make estrogens, which are little letters that go to the uterus to say, get ready for pregnancy, this could be it. Or in a man's body, the testes make testosterone that goes through the bloodstream to his brain and I guess makes him run for president or whatever. Just kidding. Hormones always go from one part of the body to another part of the body, and they make it do things. The thyroid gland makes thyroid hormone that goes to the cells and gives them energy. And if you don't have enough of the hormone, things don't work right. But if you have too much of that hormone, things can be off kilter. So when it comes to breast cancer, yes, if a woman has excess estrogen in her blood, her risk of particularly postmenopausal breast cancer, which is the big one, is higher. And this is true for hormones she might swallow as say a hot flashes prescription. But it's also true for hormones that she's making in her body and hormones she's taking in from food like cheese, for example. So those are all things we want to tackle.
And I would like everybody to listen to what you have to say about the people who say, I eat organic cheeses or I eat organic meats, and those meats are not injected with any extra hormones.
Well, keep in mind, cancer is also organic. It comes in your body without chemicals. No, organic cheese, organic meat, this is nonsense. When I was a kid, my grandpa was growing grass-fed beef. And it causes heart attacks and colorectal cancer just like the feedlot beef. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of difference, really. Here's the issue. Let's talk about dairy. Dairy products come out of the cow. The cow to make milk. Cows don't make milk. A cow is impregnated, and after she gives birth, then her body makes milk. And by the way, for anyone who has a heart, the process by which cows are artificially inseminated and have their infants taken away from them at birth, the males are killed for veal, the females are raised in isolation so that they can get artificially inseminated. And all of their 20-year lifespans are shut down by a captive bolt pistol shot to the head at about age 4. So the reason I mention that is if people need an extra motivation to get away from a hunk of cheese, The fact that the dairy industry is actually just a very slow-moving, abusive meat industry is good to remember. Okay, but that's not why you brought me on your show. When the cows are pregnant, the gestation of a cow is about 9 months. And they're impregnated every single year to keep their milk consumption high. During that time, they are milked during much of their pregnancy. Not all of it, but much of it. And a pregnant cow makes estrogen, and it gets into the milk and it's concentrated in the cheese. And so your grilled cheese sandwich has actual estrogen in it that is an exact match for yours. And one could rightly say it's not much, it's only a trace. True. However, researchers at the Adventist Health Study 2 earlier this year put out a shocking study showing that milk drinking women have about 50% higher risk of breast cancer compared to women who don't drink milk. Women who have had cancer in the past, breast cancer, have roughly a 59% higher risk of dying of their cancer if they're big consumers of cheese or other high-fat dairy. So dairy products are not innocuous by any stretch of the imagination. They are hormone drivers in a very negative way. Same for men. You see much higher prostate cancer risk among milk drinking men. So good time to scrap the milk. So
when you mention that the estrogen is a perfect match for our body, that is not the case with the phytoestrogen or the phytonutrients in soy.
Soy has the exact opposite effect. Soy reduces cancer risk and it reduces the likelihood of dying of cancer. And that's very important to understand, because if you look on the internet, you'll see all kinds of mythology about it. And the soy does have what are called isoflavones, and they do in fact attach to estrogenic receptors in cells. And so that freaked people out. They thought, oh my goodness sakes, this will drive cancer. But the research didn't turn out that way. We have now more than 40 studies showing that soy clearly reduces cancer risk, both breast cancer in women and prostate cancer in men. And so what we have discovered is that you have alpha receptors and you have a separate beta receptor. And the beta receptor is where soy attaches. And you can think of it as in your car, you got the gas pedal, and you got the brake. And if you're stepping on the brake, you're slowing down cancer. And so that's how soy helps prevent cancer. You don't have to have it. It's optional, but it doesn't cause cancer. It does the opposite.
Yeah, a lot of people are afraid of soy because they've heard that it causes cancer, and I'm glad you're able to clarify that. You mentioned upping your plant-based foods is super important, but you mentioned oil before, and I wanted to ask you this because a lot of people ask us about oil, and I know there's different levels and different doctors that are saying no oil, oil-free, yes oil, a little bit of oil, depending on what's going on. Are there good foods and bad foods that are all plant-based? Is oil something that people should be avoiding, and why?
In a nutshell, yes. I think it's good to avoid oil. And I think of it as a little bit like sugar. People are used to the idea of sugar is evil. So let's start there. Why is sugar evil? If you take an apple, it has natural fruit sugars in it, and nobody thinks that's bad. That's good for you. That powers your body. In fact, glucose powers your movements, powers your brain. So great. But the sugar that people don't like is added sugars. So how do you get that? You take sugar cane, and you send it to a factory where all of the fiber and pulp is removed and you're left with sugar. And that sugar is added to a drink. And even if you call the drink Dr. Pepper, it's still not a medical beverage. It's just a bunch of junk. So let's talk about oil. If you have an olive and you pop it in your mouth, that's kind of what nature thought you were going to do. Fair enough. And you might have 2 or 3 or 4. However, if you take 10,000 olives and you send them to a factory where they throw away all the fiber and all the pulp, and they put all of just the oil itself into a bottle, it's like sugar. It's something nature never thought you'd have. You know, there's no faucet on the olive tree. You have to extract that oil. Now, having said that, olive oil is dramatically better than chicken fat. And when I say better, I mean animal fats are very high in saturated fat, which drives heart disease and it drives Alzheimer's disease, according to the best research we have. So the numbers are beef fat is about 50% saturated fat. The other parts of beef fat are other kinds of oils. Chicken fat maybe roughly 30% saturated fat. So you don't want that. And even if it's chicken breast without the skin, it is surprisingly fatty. Chicken is the most unhealthy thing. People should get away from it. You take olive oil, it's not 50%, it's not 30%, it's down to about 14. So olive oil is definitely better than animal fats. But if you're trying to lose weight, you're probably going to want to set them all aside. If you're trying to get your cramps to go away, you're going to discover that vegan gets you halfway there, and getting away from the added fats gets you the rest of the way there.
Is there, so of all the oils, if somebody says, I'm willing to go plant-based, I'm willing to go vegan, but I can't give up all my oil yet, olive oil would be their best option?
You can do whatever you want. If your goal is to reverse diabetes, lose weight, or conquer menstrual cramps, I would get away from them all. And your answer in that case is to go onto your online ordering thing and buy a really good nonstick pan, and you'll discover in about 12 hours you're cured of your oil addiction. And by the way, let me say a few bad words about coconut oil. It's been heavily marketed and described as being healthful. Somebody's got a grove of coconut trees somewhere that they're pushing. But coconut oil really does raise cholesterol significantly. It may not be as bad as butter, but it definitely does raise cholesterol. So if you have coconut oil, put it in your hair, shine your shoes with it.
Rub it in your skin.
Rub it in your skin. Yeah, externally applied is fine. But
people will say, but it's a good source of healthy fat. So if I'm not going to have that as a good source of healthy fat, where am I going to get it from? Do you just say eat the olive, eat the avocado, eat the coconut instead of getting the oil from it?
You're not going to become fat deficient. It's very, very, very unlikely. If you take a sprig of broccoli and send it to a laboratory, they'll tell you it's about 7 or 8% fat. And your physiological need for fats is about 2 or 3% of your calories. So you're gonna be okay. But what you said is right. If you have let's say you have some almonds or some walnuts, you will get some healthy fats with all that good packaging that nature provided, which has got fiber and some other good things, and you'll get a little vitamin E in there too. And my trick for that is, because almonds are addicting, you know what I mean, especially when they salt them up and put in this smoky flavor. Take your hand and pour them into the palm of your hand and stop before it hits your fingers. At that point, it's an ounce, good amount. And then don't eat it, because if you do, you'll fill your hand again until you are, you know what I mean. So don't eat it. What you do is you crumble it up and you put it on your oatmeal or on your salad. So you use the nuts as an ingredient. So about an ounce a day used as an ingredient, I think is a nice addition to life. But even there, if you're really struggling with your weight, even there, you might back off.
Got it. So we will not become hormone deficient. Our brains will still function properly if we're getting our fat from nuts and legumes and all the other good foods that add up over the course of the day, as opposed to adding fat into the diet specifically for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. And your brain's going to function better. There was recently a study that came out in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition looking at people who are eating a lot of saturated fat. That's the coconut fat, and also chicken fat, and especially cheese fat. That's saturated fat. And they looked cognitively at these people after their meals, and they are much more sluggish after the meal than if they skipped those fats. So a low-fat diet is a good way to wake up.
So you mentioned sugars before, and I want to go back to that, because yes, sugar in an apple is good, but there are people out there who are thinking that those sugars from fruits are not good. We've heard from many different other camps of nutrition that even sugar in fruit can create cancer, and cancer grows and thrives on eating sugars, whether it's processed sugar or natural sugar.
There are doctors, diabetic patient doctors, that are telling them not to have fruit because of the sugar.
Yeah, that's really a mistake. Your brain runs on sugar, and you can kill yourself in about 7 seconds by giving yourself a massive overdose of insulin that drives your blood sugar level down to 0, and you'll be dead. Your glucose is as normal for your body as gasoline is for your car. It's just the fuel that our body evolved to take advantage of. But what people are getting at is that there are some people who, for some reason, their bodies aren't processing glucose naturally in a normal way. Normally, the sugar goes into your blood and then it passes into your cells and powers them. And there are some people where, for some reason, it's not getting into their cells. It's not getting into their muscles. It's not getting into their liver. And why not? It's building up into their blood, and then you diagnose pre-diabetes or diabetes, and you're worried about that. And so those people make a mistake, and their doctors make a mistake very often. They say, well, just don't eat too many apples, and don't eat too much rice, and don't eat too much bread or potatoes because you're carbohydrate intolerant. Okay, that's 1950s science. If you take that patient and you have them put on a hospital gown and lie down on an exam table and pass into a magnetic resonance spectroscopy machine, it's expensive and it's difficult, and our team does this. What you discover is the reason why they're having trouble processing sugar. It's that fat has built up inside their muscle cells, and as the fat builds up, that sugar can no longer get inside. And fat has built up into in their liver cells, and as the fat builds up in the liver, sugar can't get inside. Why not? Because the buildup of fat stops insulin from being able to work. Insulin is a hormone. It comes from the pancreas, like a letter in the mail, arrives at the surface of the muscle cell where it acts just like a key to bring sugar into the cell. And if insulin is misbehaving because the cell is full of fat and the insulin can't work, the sugar builds up in the blood, and then you get your doctor saying, gee, I don't know, don't eat so many apples. Mistake. So what do? We take that patient, they get dressed and they go home. And then we say, now you're gonna be on a vegan diet now. That means no animal fat anymore. And we keep oils low too, including olive oil. And then what happens is you send them back and they put on their hospital gown and they go in the scanner again. And you discover that after 14, 15, 16 weeks of being on this diet, the fat has diminished in their muscles, and the fat in their liver has diminished. And then the sugar that goes into their blood now will go into their muscle cells, and they're tolerating it again, and their body can function the way it was supposed to. So anyway, the science has marched on in a really good way, and this has allowed us to reverse diabetes and reverse prediabetes and get people to reduce their medications or get off their medications in many cases.
So is there any evidence that sugar will actually create cancer growth, whether somebody's on a vegan diet or on an omni diet?
Well, anything in excess is something unhelpful. Let's say you're eating 1,800 calories a day, and I go on my cookie binge because it's 11 o'clock at night, and I'm angry and I'm tired and whatever, and so I'm eating a whole bag of Oreos. Yeah, all of that stuff is not healthy. But if we're eating 4 food groups, those are fruits and vegetables and grains and legumes, and we're eating the amount that we need to function, that's really a healthy regimen. Do throw in a supplement of B12. You need it. And if you live way up north, you might need some vitamin D. And yeah, exactly. You might need some vitamin D because that normally comes from the sun. And many of us have the bad judgment to leave our tropical paradise homes and don't get so much sun naturally as we should.
Perfect. And that's definitely what we do always recommend. And for a lot of people who do live south, they're not necessarily being exposed to the sun as much as they should be or need to be for that absorption. So it's important for them too. Coming back to the sugar just in one different way, when you have your patients who say, I like to bake or I still like some sweets sometime, what do you recommend as the best sweetener for them to use?
I have to tell you, I'm not a great baker or frankly cook in general.
You haven't made a wedding cake?
No, I'm happy to tell you I've gotten to this stage of my life without ever having prepared a wedding cake and have eaten as few as possible. So I'll leave that up to your other guests who have much more wisdom about culinary secrets.
You mentioned the breast cancer and the cramps. Is it all the same for prostate cancer? You mentioned it very briefly, but I want to bring that for our male audience because prostate cancer really affects a lot of people. is the plant-based nutrition going to be having the exact same effect as it does on the women for the men?
The dietary prescription is the same. The mechanisms might be a little different. At Harvard University, the Physicians' Health Study showed that men consuming more dairy had about a 34% higher risk of prostate cancer. And then the next study at Harvard was the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, and it was now about a 60% higher risk of prostate cancer in dairy. And so what we think is going on is that when men consume milk, something happens in them that's actually identical to what happens when the calf drinks milk from the calf's mother. And that is that the cow's milk goes into either the calf's body or the man's body. And when it gets into your body starts making something called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor. And if you take IGF-1 and you mix it in a test tube with cancer cells, they flourish. So IGF-1 is a normal thing to have in quite high quantities in your blood when you are a baby and an adolescent and early teens. But when you're an adult, high IGF-1 is going to stimulate the growth of cancer cells. And by the way, that's not only true for prostate cancer, it also appears to be true for breast cancer.
Right.
Perfect. So we wanted to give you an opportunity if there was somebody who is your book, Your Body in Balance, speaking to. So if somebody listening really wants to pass it on, who should they give it to?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I wrote this for a number of groups, maybe number one, women who are struggling with hot flashes, and you're sitting in a meeting and you're just sweating and you'd like to know the bigger picture and what are these and what can I do about them and how can I tackle that? And the menopause chapter goes into detail not only about hot flashes, but also about sexual functioning. And many women have issues in that whole domain that they may not have ever wanted to talk with their doctor about. And so we're gonna talk about it. So I think probably most of the people who pick up Your Body in Balance might be in that category. But I have to say my heart breaks for the 14-year-old girl who's on the floor of her bathroom at school, curled up with cramps, and told, welcome, she goes to the nursing office and says, do you have an aspirin? Do you have something? And they say to her, welcome to adulthood. And I got to say, this is just ridiculous. She needs help, and the help she needs are foods that get her hormones back into balance so that she can function again. For the guy who's got erectile dysfunction, and he thought he had performance anxiety, let me tell you, you don't have that. You've got atherosclerosis, and we're going to cure it. It's around here we see a lot of guys who they might come in for diabetes or high blood pressure or to lose weight, but their erectile dysfunction quite often goes away. It just goes away. And that's because we put them on a diet that opens the arteries back up so they got blood flow and they can function again. So all of those are my audiences, but I hope people will also look at the section on thyroid functioning, because it's so mysterious. People are kind of feeling crummy and low energy and gaining weight, can't figure out why, and suddenly when you discover some really tiny diet tweaks that get your thyroid behaving again, people can feel better than they felt in a long time.
So you talk about diet tweaks. What are, as an actionable tip for people who want to feel better, what are your, let's say, 3 top foods that people should be getting in just about every day?
Okay, let me give you just some basics, then I'm going to give you some extra credit. The basics I mentioned already: vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans. That's my basic palette. Don't forget B12 and vitamin D. If you do that, it will revolutionize your health. Just that. Throw out the animal products, you're going to feel fantastic. Okay, extra credit. I want to suggest a couple things that people might also profit from. Back in 1924, here in the U.S., the Morton Salt Company started to sell a product called iodized salt. It was a little blue canister with a girl in an umbrella, and they wiped out iodine deficiency. And suddenly thyroid conditions kind of went away because you need iodine to make thyroid hormone. And suddenly everybody had it. What's happened? In the past 5-10 years, we've gotten too sophisticated. So we're using sea salt and kosher salt and Himalayan salt, and they don't have iodine in them unless it says so on the label, which it usually doesn't. And so they're getting sluggish. And I'm not saying that you need salt. There are other sources of iodine, but people aren't getting just that one little Clark Kent nutrient. They're not getting anymore, and so they feel crummy again. So the best sources, iodized salt is fine. You don't need a lot. 1/3 of a teaspoon is all you need per day. But your more sophisticated source, you go to the nearest sushi bar, and the sushi chef says, "What can I make for you?" And you say, "Don't give me the fish sushi." I don't do that. I'm vegan, and I'm not well enough insured for your fish stuff anyway. But you get the cucumber roll, or the asparagus roll, or the sweet potato roll. It's wrapped in nori. That all seaweeds have a really healthy, highly absorbable form of iodine, which is why you tend not to see this problem in countries that consume a lot of sea vegetables. So anyway, that's getting adequate iodine is another thing to just add into the armamentarium there.
So 1 sheet a week, 1 sheet a day?
Yeah, as if it's nori or if it's wakame, if you have a bowl of miso soup, the little strips in there, those are usually wakame. And by the way, in the back of my book, you'll see a third seaweed called arame, A-R-A-M-E, arame. It's thinner, really delicate. And what I do is, even though I'm a bumbler in the kitchen, I can do this. I slice a cucumber like potato chip thin, and you lay it out and put a tiny bit of salt on it, put the arame on it, a little seasoned vinegar, let it just kind of think for a couple minutes, and it's the lightest, most delicate salad you ever had in your life. And that's also a really good iodine source too. But it's also just, it gets the palate thinking about delicacy as opposed to glop. So anyway, it's a good way to go.
Love that. That's amazing. And thank you so much for writing this book for all of those people, because it's going to help so many. If people want to reach out to you, where would be the best place for them to go?
Well, our website is PCRM.org. That stands for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM.org. And let me tip my hat to Lindsay S. Nixon. Lindsay did all the recipes in it. 65 of them. They're quick, they're easy to make, and she just is a master. Oh, and by the way, when she sent me the recipe, she sent a note saying, "This way of eating cured my cramps too." So I took that as validation. But anyway, hats off to Lindsay. She's done a great job.
We'd like to thank you so much, and Lindsay, but we'd like to thank you so much for your time today, your expertise, everything that you're doing for society in general, but especially for taking the time here on the Plant Trainers podcast with our listeners. And it's been wonderful. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for spreading the good word as you're doing.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you.